Hello and welcome to the New Work in Philosophy YouTube channel. I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to discuss my recent publication in Synthes called Monadic Panpsychism. As the name implies, the paper is on panpsychism, which is the view that consciousness is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of reality. What does that exactly mean? Well, it means that at the smallest level, at the level of fundamental particles, we can find, according to the theory, traces of, let's say, basic or primitive consciousness, which we can then use to get a more detailed picture of how consciousness comes about at higher levels, such as the level of the human brain, for example. Now, there are two major kinds of panpsychism, the first of which is combinatory panpsychism. And combinatory panpsychists claim that microsubjects combine or aggregate in order to produce subjects at higher levels, such as the human mind. On the other hand, we have emergentist panpsychism, which is the claim that those microsubjects somehow cause consciousness at higher levels, again, such as the human mind. So the only difference in principle is the method in which those microsubjects lead to the coming about of a more complex subject. Now, in my research, I have mostly focused on combinatory panpsychism and the combination problem, which is the most serious objection that combinatory panpsychists have to face. And it's the question of how those small subjects at the fundamental layer of reality could combine to yield larger subjects at higher levels of complexity. After all, it seems intuitive that subjects are somehow closed off, windowless, and ignorant of each other's feelings and beliefs, even to the point that it is contradictory to think that my perspective could somehow be combined with yours, and that would somehow lead to a coherent third or a new subject, which is different from you and me. So in my paper, I wanted to start off from the premise that subjects really can't combine, and I wanted to formulate a coherent conception of panpsychism without relying on combination, aggregation, or even the subjects causing a new and further subject to emerge in virtue of their interactions. My view rests on what I call microphenomenal structuralism, which is the claim that the phenomenal character of every microsubject, or what they experience, depends on its relations to other microsubjects featuring in the same relevant causal structure, such as the human brain. But what does that exactly mean? I want to say that there is a hierarchy between those microsubjects, so that one of them can sort of inherit really the phenomenal character which is encoded, right, or relationally constituted by the whole. So I want to say that every microsubject, every fundamental particle which has consciousness as a property, has its phenomenal character defined not just intrinsically, as perhaps Russellian panpsychists would think, but also in virtue of the relations that particular microsubject features in. This implies that there are two parts to consciousness, one of them being consciousness as such, as I like to call it, and as Michael Tai likes to call it as well, which is just, in my view, or according to my definition, just the pure perspective, just the pure possibility for experiencing as such. And on the other hand, we have those qualities of experience, such as the redness of an apple, for example, or the sharp pain of a headache, or the taste of wine, which is relationally constituted by the particles featuring in the causal structure, or in the brain in this case. Specifically, I want to say that microsubjects have a phenomenal character which is not just intrinsic, it's not just the intrinsic type of experience that they have, but also that they can have a phenomenal character which is relationally defined in terms of the role they play in the relevant causal structure, and also in terms of the relations they have towards every other microsubject featuring in that structure. So to take the example of a fundamental particle such as a quark again, we can say that there is a quark type of experience when it is in isolation when it is just a quark, but also say that there's a quark type of experience in part of this or that causal structure. Now, this is the move I made in order to avoid the palette problem, which is the question of how those fundamental particles, such as quarks or electrons, for the sake of discussion, could lead to the deep and rich experiential life that we experience in day-to-day life, right? So if there's only a quark type of experience on the one hand and an electron type of experience on the other, and so on and so on, the problem is that there's quite a limited palette of qualities to work with in order to get to, the visual, sensory, multimodal experience that we have just all the time. But if there are as many experiences as there are relations at the fundamental level, then we no longer have a limited palette to work with, and then I think we can easily get to very complex states of consciousness, even if we are just at the fundamental layer of reality. Furthermore, I also argue that if we can defend microphenomenal structuralism, we could also avoid the combination problem, right? Because if you have microsubjects at the fundamental layer of reality just standing in certain relations, so that every individual one can at any given point really play the dominant role, right, and inherit the phenomenal character of the experience of the whole structure, or even, as I mentioned in the paper, the experience could be just rippling across the whole brain, so that every single microsubject has at the same time the same experience as a sort of backup system, right? Then we can avoid the combination problem, because if you haven't noticed, this whole model really avoids any sort of combination or emergence, right? Because those microsubjects, they do not combine in order to create a larger new subject, but rather they just sort of shift, or rather, let's not say shift, but they stand in a hierarchical structure, so that one or more or all of them just have the experience which is encoded by the whole structure reflected in them. So really there is no talk of combination, aggregation, or emergence of any sort of new third, billionth, or whatever subject, right? So I try to make a very simple, minimal, let's say, model, right, which really avoids many of the objections that other kinds of panpsychism have to face. Now, of course, I don't think that my model faces no issues at all. Of course it does, right? There's the problem of how those microsubjects, for example, could lead to mental causation, right? There's the problem of what the subject is in this, what I am, what personal identity is in this model, because it's very different. And I admit that it might be even more counterintuitive than other forms of panpsychism, because what I'm saying is that really what you and I are, in a way, are just simple microsubjects experiencing the whole of the brain. And we're not even the same static microsubject at all times, right? I think it changes, maybe constantly, like flickering from one to another. And that's really why I avoided this, what I call static monadic panpsychism, right? Which is the claim that only one microsubject is at all times the seat of consciousness, right? The dynamic model is really just the same, but the role changes constantly. And the global model, which I discussed in the paper as well, is that all of them constantly reflect the whole experience of the brain. Like I said, a backup system, right? However, despite the problems that I mentioned, I do think I offer an interesting alternative to already existing formulations of panpsychism, and at the very least a blueprint or a new way of thinking about the theory, which I certainly hope to develop further in the future, and I hope it inspires others to do the same. So if you're interested in reading my paper, you can find it online in Synthes for free. It's open access, so you can just download it. And I would also like to thank you for watching this video and for your patience. It really means a lot, and I do hope to see you some other time as well.